Join SME and unlock endless money-saving opportunities to accelerate your career. Use code JOIN24 to save 20% when you join or renew by October 31st. Visit sme.org/join24 and use code JOIN24 to learn more.
Welcome to Manufacturing the Workforce of Tomorrow, a new minicast brought to you by SME. I'm your host, Tony Meary, Director of Community Engagement and Workforce Innovation. In this minicast, we're going to dive deep into workforce development, exploring challenges, opportunities, and solutions that are shaping the future of manufacturing. Each month, I'll bring you insightful interviews with key industry leaders, sharing success stories, highlighting significant events, and providing valuable resources to help you stay ahead of the curve. Whether you're a seasoned manufacturing professional or just starting your journey, Manufacturing the Workforce of Tomorrow is your go-to source for the latest news and trends in workforce development. So join me every month as we work together to build a stronger, more resilient manufacturing workforce. Let's get started.
I am so fortunate to have somebody kicking off our Manufacturing the Workforce of Tomorrow minicast, and that is our Chief Workforce Development Officer, Jeannine Kunz. Jeannine has been with SME for over 20 years. If you're in the workforce development space, you definitely know her name. You've probably heard her give one of her compelling and amazing presentations. And I'm fortunate, I don't even want to say to work on your team, but to serve on your team. So Jeannine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. And it's a privilege as always working with you. So thank you.
And I think I want to kick it off because one of the biggest things I hear in the market is like, so are you with Tooling SME? Are you with SME? Are you doing events? Like, what are you doing in your role? And I love the way you paint the picture of who is SME and what does SME do?
Yeah, great. Well, that one's a little easy for me because I've been with the organization going into my 25th year, proudly into my 25th year. And SME is a nonprofit. Starting with that, I think that's an important part of answering very first and foremost is we're a nonprofit organization that's existed for almost 100 years. What I think is really interesting about SME is when we were formed, it was amid the Great Depression. And it was because people came together, which is still very core to who we are today, is about people coming together to solve big issues. And that drove the mission back then. And while things have changed, we're still very much driven by advancing manufacturing. Today, our purpose really kind of sits at the idea of advancing manufacturing to drive competitiveness, resiliency, and national security, because that's obviously very critical to our organization and to manufacturing right now. And the unique way we go about that, if you were to say, how do you go about solving those kinds of, audacious goals in terms of our purpose, it's really, we see it in two very key distinctive ways, is advancing technology adoption, right? So this idea of all this emerging technology and how do we insert that into the classrooms? How do we insert that into our companies so that we can utilize the advancements in technology for growing our competitiveness, our productivity within our companies, our profitability, our sustainability, from a green standpoint. So this idea of technology insertion and adoption is one way in our mission of delivering on that big vision and purpose. And the second is talent, building the capabilities of North America's talent. And so it's really kind of two very kind of simple but very complex axes to what we stand for, which is technology and talent. And there's a term we've been using is really about unlocking, the individual or human potential to empower manufacturing to go do those things. So at the underpinning of all of it, thankfully, is all about people.
And I love that because I think the shift that I've seen in my almost 20 years in the manufacturing education space is that we are so focused on impact. And I think we have a team of doers, which is really fun. I think about like our update calls where it's like, oh my gosh, we're running through a laundry list of all the things that we're out doing. But I also think it's really cloudy when we talk about workforce development. So can you give your definition on what is workforce development and what are we doing as SME in workforce development?
Yeah, and so it is, and I think the term gets used, quite extensively, which is good because, again, we want it to be at the forefront of people's minds when we think about manufacturing and the importance back to what I just said earlier about people and the workforce itself. And SME, we sit kind of, I didn't mention when I said, we're a nonprofit, but we're an international organization mostly focused in North America, and, more predominantly in the United States. So we're a national nonprofit. So when it comes to workforce, it is a national and an international challenge, but we are taking kind of a national approach to thinking about the problems, if you will, on that national scale, but also really fine-tuning and aggregating that and activating that at the local level with communities and all the goodness that happens across the country. And the way we kind of define that work under workforce is really under attract, develop, and retain. We see two very distinctive, I'll call it constituent stakeholders in the workforce development space. One are individuals, and those individuals could be young individuals. They could be individuals that are later in their career. Individuals is one key stakeholder, and the other is our employers, if you will. And if we serve those two well, right, the individuals who are looking for an opportunity in life, a career, a pathway, an advancement, whatever it might be, and the employers who are looking for people, if those two constituents can be better served, where everyone in the middle, which includes an organization like SME, who's trying to connect them as quickly, efficiently, and effectively as possible, removing as many barriers that are there, optimizing the education system, optimizing the workforce systems, optimizing all of the work that so many of us do in that middle ground that connects individuals to employers. We see that as the space that really ultimately kind of defines workforce, right? So it's the elements of kind of almost supply and demand, and the system that gets them connected together as quickly as possible with the right skills at the right time for the right needs of our nation.
And one of the things that I love is I don't think there's any ideas that are off the table when it comes to our team. So I love the fact that every once in a while it's like, oh, I kind of have a wild idea. And you're like, perfect, let's vet that out. But I also love the fact that we tend to find these little pockets of excellence where things are happening in communities, and we have the opportunity to amplify that or help accelerate that. Can you talk a little bit about optimize, accelerate, and scale? Because that's definitely been what we've adopted on the workforce development team when we're looking at the bigger picture and what that means and how we do it, and really the perspective from your angle on how it's our duty to do this for the industry.
Yeah. So because we are a longstanding nonprofit in manufacturing, it gives us that, as you mentioned, responsibility and accountability to do something with that charter and that mission and that history and that legacy, as well as all the partners that we collaborate with to pull off the kinds of things that we aim to achieve under workforce or just SME's mission as a whole. And so over time, when we would talk about this idea of the slogan of kind of thinking nationally and acting locally, the other end of that is to see something locally and scale it nationally or accelerate it. And that's to say, how do we leverage our access to the market on a national scale? So that I'll use an example. I was just at a conference just 2 days ago. It's called NASTAD. It's, with all the state training directors and economic development and engaging these great organizations that sit right at the base of their communities, helping employers, especially those that are moving or growing their operations and have major workforce opportunities. That they were sharing best practices, and that's a really good example where we can hear. And I did hear something, and big shout out to Mississippi with an awesome and extensive program that they're doing with career counselors and career coaches and navigators, as we know that that's a national challenge. And SME can hear that and understand that in that case, Mississippi, their charter is the state, right? And they can share it at a NASTAD conference and they can share it, but who's going to catch that football and run it into the end zone and do something with it? We want to take that kind of information, share it out as much as possible, even beyond that conference, but also maybe take it. And I happen to sit on the National Coalition for Career Development, where we have a new nonprofit where we stood up. So how can we connect that little piece of information at a local level, see how it influences objectives that we have on a national level to influence something across the United States. That would be one example that just happened this week, but we, in doing that, SME earlier this year embarked on a very important program that connected with community colleges. And that was, again, under the same idea of how do we kind of accelerate and scale and take the national footprint that SME has, along with a lot of local goodness. And we launched a program called the Manufacturing Imperative Workforce Pipeline Challenge. And that program now has 27 community college presidents across 17 different states, really aligning themselves together, doing good work within their communities, but really coming together also as a community of practice. And there's lots of layers to what we're doing in that program. But to the question you asked, at the heart of it is aggregating up the lessons learned, the patterns, the consistent things that we hear are barriers to those community colleges and accomplishing the kind of work we talked about earlier about connecting people to jobs as quickly and efficiently and effectively as possible with the right skills at the right time. They're able to identify barriers that we can look at on a consistent basis across those different colleges, across different state lines, and aggregate those up. And we were having conversations with the White House and sharing those, or we've been sharing them with the Department of Education. We've been sharing them with our good partners at NCATC, who are our partner with us on that program, and many other instances, the National Governors Association, to be somewhat of a beacon for all those colleges on a national level. But then also the cool part of it is they're also learning from another college in another state that maybe now has semiconductors in their community. And through this community that we're building, this network, they're also able to learn in other states and transport those ideas. So lots of great examples, but at the heart of what we want to do as an organization is just try to accelerate good things that are happening and take our national responsibility to raise that up at scale across the country.
And I think it all boils back down to technology and talent, which are really the two things that we're trying to accelerate. We're trying to accelerate the talent pipeline. We're trying to accelerate technology adoption. Can you talk about how all this fits together and kind of culminates into some of the different programs and projects that we're rolling out?
Yeah. What I love about manufacturing, from the first day I got into the industry, it is rich with technology, right? So I've talked a lot about people, and people are absolutely critical. But technology for our manufacturing environment is what really gets people excited, right? They get excited about entering their careers or adapting, and they go to our trade shows a lot of times and our events, and they look at all the cool. We actually have an event coming up next week where our Fab Tech event, where people are going to come and see technology, and they're going to come and see how they can insert that into their organization to do amazing things. For us, the way we look at it is the relationship between technology and talent, though, is interdependent. One can really not thrive without the other. And so while the industry is rich with all this cool and cutting edge technology, it's ultimately driven by people and relationships. We know that it's the people behind the scenes that need to program those new machines or that new technology, operate it, troubleshoot it, maintain it, come up with all the innovative ways of leveraging the technology. So from our perspective, Tony, it is from the workforce side, there is a very strong interdependent connection between technology and talent, which is why it's our two driving pillars of our mission and what we spend our time thinking about as an organization. But for workforce, what's unique is we also have to really keep a very strong eye on how technology is evolving and being adopted in the industry, so that we have a very keen sense of what does that do to the actual individual or education system, so that we can be equipped to have the right kinds of trainings, or the right kinds of modalities, the right kind of insertion of support to educators and industry, so that we can upskill people to those new skills or knowledge that is needed to adopt the technology. So if your semiconductors, for example, comes into the United States as a new entrant or a re-emerging entrant, because we used to do some here in the United States, we as an organization not only have to support and kind of look at that technology, but really break that down and understand the impact on people. So those two definitely go hand in hand. And I love that SME has both of those, because really one doesn't exist without the other.
And I think we see it between membership and, our events that we're curating and what we're putting out with digital media, with the Education Foundation, with our, e-learning and certification. We have the opportunity to sit at so many tables to hear those conversations and to help accelerate not just individuals and technology, but full-blown solutions. And I think we're poised right now that we have such a powerhouse team, hundreds of years of workforce development and manufacturing experience. I feel like it's an exciting time to be in manufacturing. It's an exciting time to be in workforce development, but most importantly, it's an exciting time to be at SME.
I think so. I've been, as I mentioned, here for, it's kind of hard to believe it's a quarter of our history of 100 years. And I've really kind of actually been more excited about what stands in front of manufacturing. And then also, partly as I like challenges, we have, though, what stands in front of us in manufacturing does create challenges for us as a nation to solve. And in some cases, as I mentioned earlier, even when you think about national security, that have really important outcomes and impacts if we don't get this right. So that's also very inspiring to me on a day-to-day basis to do what we do every day as a group. And I'm certainly privileged to work with people like yourself and our staff that are so truly committed to our industry and our purpose and our partnerships and our members. And the really cool thing is that we get to work with a lot of people outside of our staff, right? And so that to me is really kind of the greatest part, is that this whole industry does really come together. And I talked about how that's how SME started, was about 33 people coming together to solve a problem. And here we are 100 years later doing the same thing, just on a bigger scale and with more complex, and maybe not more complex, but new challenges.
Fantastic. Well, I cannot thank you enough for your time today and your thoughtful leadership as we maneuver all these really exciting opportunities.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of Manufacturing the Workforce of Tomorrow. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform to stay updated on all the latest trends and happenings in workforce development. Don't forget to visit our website at sme.org for more resources and information. Until next time, let's continue to build a stronger, more resilient manufacturing workforce together.